Hey guys, Sugar Bear John here, back again today with another video. This time it's going to be on the Blood Dk as they stand in the Shadowlands beta. I've been in the beta for about 2 weeks now, and keep in mind things can change quite a bit. But what I wanted to go over today with you guys in this video is so far what it's looking like to be the best Covenant choice, the Conduit in that particular Covenant, the Conduit tree, the baseline abilities that we have at our disposal, talents, Runeforges, and then also the legendary abilities. So here we go, let's get into it. And guys, before I forget, don't forget to hit the thumbs up if you like the video, subscribe, it supports me a lot, and comment down below if you feel like I said something that was confusing or was not correct. Maybe you're in the Shadowlands beta, or maybe you did some research that I overlooked. And also comment down below if you just have a question or if you want to say hi. I'm generally good at replying to people, but enjoy the video, guys. Alright, so first things first, what I wanted to go over was baseline abilities, first from just the Death Knight as in general, and then I wanted to go over the Blood Dk specifically, what's changed baseline for them. Just to save some time, I wanted to make sure I just went over the abilities that were completely new coming to Shadowlands. So let's hop right into it. First off, what has changed is Anti-Magic Zone is now baseline. It's a 2-minute cooldown, and it's a powerful magical buff for your team. Basically what it does is it puts a shell on the ground for 10 seconds, and it basically reduces all spell damage taken within that bubble by 20%. So this is actually a pretty big cooldown that used to be baseline if you've been playing World of Warcraft for a long time, but I'm definitely excited that it's back in the game, and I'm sure a lot of Blood DKs are as well. Next up is Chains of Ice. Chains of Ice costs a rune, 30-yard range. Basically, if you've played Frost DK or if you've played against a DK, you've probably witnessed this spell or fell victim to it. But Chains of Ice is now a baseline ability for the Death Knight from Blood, Unholy, and Frost. So it's going to be pretty useful for Blood DKs on weeks where Necrotic is going to be a problem and you need to kite. So it's definitely a useful toolkit in our arsenal here. Our Death Coil is now baseline as well. Playing for the past 2 weeks in the beta, I haven't actually seen a single use for Death Coil. It's a little confusing to me as to why it's actually baseline. The only time I can ever see me using this is if I pop Lichborn, needed to kite, had a bunch of runic power saved up, and I needed to heal myself up. So I would target myself with Death Coil and heal myself. I don't think that's going to be very useful in a lot of occasions. Maybe even in World PvP you can maybe see that happening, but I'm going to put a big question mark next to why Death Coil is baseline, because I have not seen a use for it as of right now. Next ability is Lichborn. I kind of just mentioned that one. That's also going to be baseline for the entire DK specs, all of them. 2-minute cooldown, you become undead for 10 seconds, and you get leech for 10%, and you're immune to charm, fears, and sleep. So this is going to be useful in some dungeons where you know that there are certain casters or bosses that either charm, fear, or sleep quite a bit, or maybe even raid bosses that cast this ability and you can immune some things like that. So this is definitely very, very useful when it comes to Death Knight toolkit. Raise Dead is another baseline ability, so every Death Knight is going to be able to have a pet. However, it is on a 2-minute cooldown for the Blood DK and the Frost DK, so you have to use it strategically in places where you know you're going to need the extra damage, or you know that you're going to need to use Raise Dead to gain the healing from it from Sacrificial Pact. So these two are kind of comboed in together. But Raise Dead, it's definitely cool that all Death Knights are going to be able to use that. But as a Blood DK, you're going to need to strategize as to when you feel like you're going to need the extra damage the most, and maybe even pre-planning on summoning your ghoul out when you know that incoming damage is going to come up, and it can be used as another external cooldown or internal, however you want to look at it, to use Sacrificial Pack and to heal yourself by 25%, and then it also does damage too. They both share 2-minute cooldowns, so this is something that you probably want to macro together or combo point, however you want to do it. But that's the baseline Death Knight changes so far. So moving on to Blood, there was a couple changes, and there was one really big one. Maybe you see it on the screen already, but I will get to it in just a second. The biggest ability that has changed really is Rune Tap is now baseline. That used to be a talent. It is 2 charges. It reduces damage taken by 20% for 4 seconds. It used to be a talent in Battle for Azeroth. Nobody ever took it because it was just not useful. Now that it's baseline, it has some uses. If you're going into a pack, you don't have Bone Shield. There's no reason why you shouldn't be, as a Blood DK, popping a Rune Tap before you engage into a mob in a Mythic Plus dungeon or a dungeon in general, whatever content you're doing, because that's usually when the Blood DK is the weakest, is when we engage a pack, if we don't have Bone Shield up for sure, and we don't have any runic power pooled. So if you're definitely bare bones of no Bone Shield, nothing, no runic power to heal yourself right up, no cooldowns, pop a Rune Tap. I like the change. It's definitely been useful for me, and it's definitely a nice change to have it just baseline as another utility kit to help our defenses. The only other thing here, guys, that has changed, and this was a huge change, and they actually just changed this a couple days ago. As you see here, Ossuary, which used to be a talent choice, I think it was in this row, level 30, is now baseline. That's huge, because this former talent, now baseline ability for Blood DK, it was so fundamental, nobody chose anything else on the row. Basically what it does is it gives you a refund of 5 runic power on your Death Strike if you have at least 5 Bone Shield stacks. Now, this was something that a lot of Blood DKs in the past were talking about and complaining about why it wasn't baseline to begin with, so it's definitely great to see that Blizzard is listening to us, and they swapped to make this actually baseline. So this is actually really huge. It gives our talent choice in that level 30 row a little bit more of, kind of have to think about it, but they finally made this baseline. Such a good swap by them, and I definitely appreciate that they listened to that. Now moving on to the talents. There hasn't been a lot of changes to the talent tree in of itself, but there are 3 changes that I do need to point out that you may be interested in come Shadowlands, that I'm actually a little bit more excited for now. So let's start up here at level 15. You have Heartbreaker, which hasn't changed. It generates 2 additional runic power per target hit. This was our baseline, Battle for Azeroth go-to tier choice in this particular tier, and it hasn't really changed. Blood Drinker's still here, and Tombstone is still here. These both have not really changed, and they still don't look very competitive when it comes to just overall survivability. So Heartbreaker is where you want to go with as it stands right now. In the level 25 row, you have Rapid Decomposition, which again hasn't changed. Your Blood Plague and Death and Decay deal 50% more damage often. Additionally, your Blood Plague leeches 50% more health. Hemostasis, whenever you cast Blood Boil, it increases the healing and damage from your Death Strike, and it stacks it to 5 times. And then you have Consumption. This was a former Legion artifact weapon ability, which still seems pretty lackluster. It looks like it got a little bit of a buff. It's on a 30-second cooldown, 150% of damage from the 593 physical damage that it does will heal you. It still doesn't have enough competition to compete with Hemostasis. So Hemostasis looks still very strong. Now the next talent tier, this is where we had Ossuary. It was right here, or it was in the middle rather, but both of these are based off of how many Bone Shield stacks you have, so they're kind of similar in the sense that this one will just give you maximum health. This one will give you health whenever you drop Crimson, either your Death and Decay from the Crimson Scourge proc. And then you have Blood Tap, which was formerly baseline, then they swapped it with Ossuary, which makes a lot more sense. 2 charges, 1 minute cooldown, and then you just basically generate a rune. So what I'm picking here in my choice is probably most likely going to be Foul Bulwark. We'll talk a little bit more, you know, when we talk about Covenant choices pretty soon, on maybe why you want to pick Relish in Blood. But I think Foul Bulwark's going to end up edging out the win here because, you know, Bone Shield is something that you're always going to want up, and it's just going to encourage you to have extra stacks. The only downside is that the most benefit you're going to get from this ability is having 10 Bone Shield charges, and it's going to be kind of hard to keep that up constantly throughout the fight. So there is some competition with Relish in Blood. I don't know if there's going to be much competition for Blood Tap, so it's going to be between these two, Relish in Blood and Foul Bulwark. We might see Relish in Blood end up edging out, as I'll talk about it sooner when we talk about Covenant choices. Next here is Will of Necropolis. This is nothing changed here. 30% health, damage taken between 30% health and reduced by 30%. Still a pretty solid go-to area. Anti-magic barrier still hasn't changed here. I think I remember saying that this actually got buffed in my previous video. The cooldown is reduced not from 15 seconds but to 20 seconds, so now it's on a 40-second cooldown if you choose this choice. In live right now, Battle for Azeroth, it's 15-second cooldown, so it's got a little buff. It's not anything to really like go crazy over, but it's there. And if you're fighting magic bosses or you're in a dungeon where there's a lot of magic damage going out, then you could probably see some benefit in this. But this is the interesting talent choice that I wanted to talk about, which was Mark in Blood. I did, again, make another video, which you'll probably see at the end of this video. I'll tag it. I talked about Mark of Blood, and I tried it out in the PTR. Basically, this ability has gotten a pretty decent buff. We might actually see some use in this. You target somebody within a 15-yard range, and for 15 seconds, all of their auto attacks heal you for 3%. So this is actually pretty nice because its uptime is 15 seconds on the target, and it's on a 6-second cooldown, so you can have it up to two mobs at once if you're doing a Mythic Plus dungeon. So when I'm looking at this tier, I'm looking at either just pure survivability from Will of Necropolis, or I'm looking for a different type of survivability from Mark of Blood. The only difference between these two, obviously, as you can see, is this one passive and this one is active. You have to actively be putting on. So if you're somebody new to the class and you're just checking out Blood DK, Will of Necropolis is probably going to be just the way to go. But if you're somebody that understands the class already and they are good at micromanaging or have good weak auras, Mark of Blood will actually be probably something you want to pick over Will of Necropolis if you don't think you're going to be falling below 30% health all the time. Gripped Deg is probably going to be the best talent choice here for most of your dungeon runs. Wraithwalk will be your talent choice when you're doing some type of raid boss that requires more mobility. Okay, so this next talent choice, again, there's some small changes here. Voracious actually got a nice little decent buff. And the Mark of Blood and Voracious were both lackluster talents that both needed buffs, and they both got buffs going into Shadowlands. So Death Strike's healing is increased by 20% and grants you 15% leech for 8 seconds. So this actually synergizes really well with Hemostasis because they basically make your Death Strikes really strong. You're also going to get the 15% leech for the 8 seconds. So Voracious, actually, you might see some good use out of this one. It is a passive ability, so it's not something you have to worry about actively putting on anything. So you might actually see this in some cases where you want your Death Strikes to be more powerful. Death Pact hasn't seen any changes whatsoever. I don't really generally like Death Pact. I think it's the negative, the downside of getting that 30% absorb, the incoming absorb heal that you have to heal through to get the absorb thing off you is not worth it. Blood Worms is probably going to be your go-to choice because it does damage and it also heals you if you drop below 50% health. And the last talent choices have not changed whatsoever. This is still on a 4-minute cooldown. Purgatory, it's your cheap death. Red Thirst reduces your vampiric blood, which is your big healing cooldown, which increases your maximum health by 30% and all the healing and absorbs you receive by 30%. So basically, Red Thirst just reduces that cooldown for every 10 runic power you spend. And then Bone Storm is going to be your AoE ability, but it kind of was lackluster in people that are Blood DKs that were pushing really high Mythic Plus keys in Battle for Azeroth, because 100 runic power to have just some extra damage go out and it only healing you up to 15% of your max health was a little bit lackluster. So most people were going Red Thirst. If you're going to be playing big competitive content, you're most likely going to go Red Thirst or Purgatory still. Purgatory, a new content where you most likely will die and make mistakes. Red Thirst, when you know that you kind of way around the dungeon, you're with a good group, and you're going to benefit more from getting more vampiric bloods out. Bone Storm for easy content, stuff where you just want extra damage. So between these two is probably where you want to go. Alright guys, so on to Runeforging. This is something that needed quite a bit of tender love and care, some TLC. For like the longest time, there was only like 3 choices, and it was pretty clear on which one you were going to go to. If you were Blood DK, you chose Fallen Crusader. If you were Unholy DK, you were going Fallen Crusader, and then if you were a Frost DK, you'd go Razor Ice, basically. So going from the top down, I'm gonna kind of give you an idea of the ones that benefit the Blood DK the most. So starting with Rune of Hysteria, this one actually is pretty interesting. It's probably one of the strongest ones that we have, because it engraves your weapon with the rune that increases maximum runic power by 20. So it'll go up by 20 your maximum runic power, and your attacks will have a chance to increase runic power generation by 20% for 8 seconds. So basically what this does is it gives you a bunch of runic power regeneration, basically meaning you're getting runic power to get more death strikes. Runic power is like the most important thing when it comes to Blood DK survival. It was always haste, and it was always runic power, max runic power, and runic power generation. So this particular Runeforge, this one right here, is probably going to be your go-to if you're really looking to survive in the long haul. I see this one being played quite a bit in hard Mythic Plus content, and maybe some of the Mythic bosses, the harder content that you see, because this is generally some pretty good survivability. Rune of Sanguination it looks pretty interesting, but it's very niche. It basically engraves your weapon with a rune that causes your death strike to deal increased damage when the target, based off the target's missing health. So it does more damage when the target has low health. When you fall below 35% health, you heal for 48% of your maximum health over 8 seconds. That's basically 6% of your max health every second for the next 8 seconds when you fall below 35% health. So the only time I really see this being used is if a raid boss has a long execute phase. So if the boss has a ton of missing health and he starts to enrage, then your death strike's going to do more damage. You're going to be able to help out your team to execute the boss down. But not only that, if the boss is enraged, he or she normally does more damage. So having this also be in your toolkit when you fall below 35% health, you start to heal up, is going to see some pretty big benefit from this particular rune. So this is very niche, but I can probably see this working with some of the raid bosses that have long execute phases. They have a ton of missing health, and you just need to help your team DPS. Rune of Spell Warding, this is just a deflection of spell damage. So this one is going to be useful for fights that have a lot of magic damage going out, any raid bosses of that sort, and any mythic dungeons that have any spell damage that is excessive. It doesn't seem very strong, but we could probably see some use for it. It's, again, a very niche one. I don't think it's strong enough for most content though. Rune of Fallen Crusader has not changed. It's probably still going to be your go-to for some cases in the medium-ish to easy content, and you may swap between Rune of Hysteria and Rune of Fallen Crusader, depending on which one you feel like you're lacking the most. If you're lacking the strength, or if you feel like you need that extra heal, from Runefallen Crusader, or if you feel like overall you just need more runic power generation. It's kind of up to your playstyle, but these two seem like they're going to be the strongest for the Blood DK and your general picks for most fights. Rune of Stone Skin Gargoyle hasn't changed either. The increase to 5% armor is still kind of lackluster, and then all your stats up by 5% is still a bit lackluster. Obviously, again, this is beta, so there are some changes that might go out, but I don't see this one being used a whole bunch. Rune of Unending Thirst, this one seems a little bit more of a leveling one because it increases your speed, and it looks like maybe it's like world PvP-ish type of rune. It increases your speed by 5%, and then whenever you kill someone with experience or honor, you heal for 5% of your maximum health, and you gain 10% haste and movement speed. So this is just probably something you want to use while you're leveling up in the new Shadowlands expansion, or if you're doing some world PvP out there. But that's basically Runeforges, basically Rune of Hysteria and Rune of the Fallen Crusader, with some niches between Rune of Sanguination and Rune of Spellwarding. Alright, now time for the shocker when it comes to Shadowlands. We have these choices between 4 covenants. There's the Necrolords, there's the Venthyr, the Kyrian, and the Night Fae. All of them are basically factions within the expansion that you choose, and they give you power-ups and abilities. You get a special class ability, and then you also get a just a general covenant ability. So each one offers something different, but you're going to be very surprised as to, if you haven't already heard, on which one's doing the best and the strongest, because it doesn't really fit the archetype of a Death Knight. Maybe you're already getting some guesses here. But we're going to start here with the Necrolords. And we're just going to look really quickly at the transmog here. Pretty cool transmog, and the mount looks pretty cool as well. Initially I wanted to go Necrolord, but as we look here at the 2 abilities as they turn in terms of player power, they're a little lackluster, and I'll read them for you. Fleshcraft, 2-minute cooldown. It's a channeled ability. Keep that in mind. Channeled ability. It forms a shield of flesh and bone over 4 seconds. Absorbs damage equal to 20% of your maximum health for 2 minutes. Basically, just puts a shield onto you. The stronger the enemy that you killed, or the corpse that you're sucking life from, the more of the shield you get, up to 50% of your max health. And then you got Abomination Limb. This was a very interesting ability that they put in here. This is the class ability. This is the ability that everybody gets. Signature ability is Fleshcraft, everybody gets that. And the DKs get Abomination Limb. This is basically on a 2-minute cooldown, which is a very long cooldown. And it basically just sprouts a limb that just deals damage to things around it, and it pulls enemies into you. Very lackluster, especially with the Blood DK, who already has a mass grip and a talent choice to reduce the mass grip. And then you also have your regular death grip. Very lackluster, doesn't seem like it does a ton of damage. It's on a very long cooldown, and it's already given us something that the class already is strong in, which is grips. So Necrolord is probably not the choice you want to go to, but I wanted to show you guys the abilities. Right, so next up we have Venthyr. Now this was my initial favorite after I realized that Necrolord's ability didn't really do much. I was then, okay, Venthyr is definitely going to be my Covenant choice. But you'll come to find out that this is still not the one that is doing the best, unfortunately. The transmog looks very cool. It fits the DK class fantasy very well. The mount, pretty nice as well. I think it's more interesting than the Necrolord one. The signature ability, which everybody gets no matter what spec or class they play, is Door of Shadows. It's a 1.5 second cast, and it's on a 1-minute cooldown. It basically teleports you a certain amount of distance, 35 yards forward, and it just gives you a little bit extra mobility. The ability that I kind of wanted to do a little bit better was this one, the Swarming Mist. I tried out the Swarming Mist and the Venthyr in a couple of dungeons, but it just ended up not doing so much. It was an extra ability on your bar that you had to remember to press. It was on a 1-minute cooldown, which is kind of long. for an ability to come up, and you'll notice, and I'll kind of compare it to the other covenant that was really good. It just basically forms a mist around you for 8 seconds, gives you 10% dodge. It's not that great. It deals damage. All these covenant abilities do damage to enemies, and every time it deals damage you gain 3 runic power up to 15. So it's kind of lackluster in terms of what it gives. 10% dodge and only 15 runic power is nothing to really like get excited for. So this is an ability I would like to see buffed up, because I know that a lot of DKs are looking to go Venthyr, but as it stands right now in terms of player power, it's not up to par, and it's not looking like it's something that people are going to pick. Okay, so the next one here is Kyrian. The Kyrian have a pretty cool transmog. As you can see here, it's kind of fits the Ret Paladin archetype, maybe like the Priest archetype. But I like it, it's pretty cool. The mount looks very cool. This kind of reminds me of the StarCraft, the Protoss or the Proton, I forgot what the name is. But that reminds me of StarCraft, their kind of theme and their architecture. The signature ability that everybody gets is summoning a steward. It's on a very, very long cooldown, 5-minute cooldown. Basically what it does, it brings a steward who gives you a File of Serenity. You can consume this to get 20% extra health, and then it removes curses, disease, poisons, and bleeds. This is basically the Dwarf racial from Alliance with extra 20% health that it gives you. It has its niches, definitely on weeks where you're going to have curses, diseases, and poisons and bleeds. This was good on Necrotic week, but they changed Necrotic a bit to be a little bit more manageable, so I'm not sure how well this is going to be for most people. Shackle the Unworthy is the class ability for the DK. It's on a 1-minute cooldown, 30-yard range. It's instant, doesn't cast, doesn't channel. But the only downfall here is that it only targets one particular person, or enemy rather, and it reduces the damage they deal to you by 5%, and it deals damage like every other covenant ability. While Shackle the Unworthy is active on an enemy, each rune spent with any attack reduces cooldown by 4 seconds. So it has like an internal like cooldown the more you use runes, but it's not really living up to a lot of what the content calls for. A lot of people run dungeons and Mythic Plus, especially me. It may see some uses if you're just a raider or if you're just a PvPer. Maybe not even that, but maybe if you can make it work with PvP. I mean, if you're in arenas and you're doing 2v2s, maybe. I think the Summon Steward is pretty good if arenas, so this might be the best for the DK that does a lot of PvP. But overall, this isn't going to be for the Blood DK that likes to do raids, that likes to do dungeons, and mainly PvEs, because it's not giving you much utility overall. And last but not least, the best Covenant choice for the Death Knight, my fairy friends, the Night Fae. So I was streaming on Twitch, and I got a lot of my viewers and subs to make fun of me for this, that I'm most likely going to be a Night Fae. Now, keep in mind, this is all kind of a general look over on how the Blood DK is looking in Shadowlands beta. So things are subject to change, and Night Fae may not continuously be the one that we pick going into Shadowlands live. There's still about 5-ish, 6 weeks until it goes live, and there's still changes that might happen. But this one is by far the most powerful Covenant choice for DK, Frost, Unholy, and Blood DK. So let's get into it. Now, the transmog, it looks amazing, and if you can't sense my sarcasm, I'm being very sarcastic here. This does not fit the Death Knight at all, but this is something more like a druid. This is something more like maybe even a shaman. The mount, again, very foresty, very naturey, very druid, but this is the best for the Death Knight right now. One ability that it gives to everybody is the signature ability Soul Shape. It's on a 1.5-minute cooldown. when you're in a rested area, like right now I'm in the Oribos, it's basically when you cast this, you stay in soul shape form, so you have it all the time, and then you can just teleport. So every 1.5 minutes in a dungeon or raid, you can use this to teleport out of something, which gives the DK some mobility. So in terms of player power, this is actually pretty useful because it does give us some teleport, it gives us some mobility. But the ability that really made the Covenant of Night phase stand out for the Death Knight is this ability right here, Death's Due. This ability replaces Death and Decay, and it basically does the same thing. It corrupts the ground in the circle. You still drop your Death and Decay. It deals damage to enemies within it, but the enemies that stand in it deal 1% reduced damage to you up to a maximum of 15%. So enemies that are attacking you, if you're Blood Dk in Mythic Plus and you're Blood Dk right now in Battle for Azeroth and you're always getting chunked away, you know that this ability is good when enemies will be doing 15% less damage to you. The other thing is, like I mentioned just earlier, is that it synergizes with a spell you already use. And as a Blood Dk, you have a passive ability called Crimson Scourge right here, which is basically whenever your Blood Plague does damage, it has a chance to have your Death and Decay cost no runes, and it resets its cooldown, and it synergizes with Death's Due. So there's times where this isn't even a 15-second cooldown, this is like a 5-second cooldown, or like 10-second cooldown rather, where it's up all the time because of Crimson Scourge. So this ability is extremely good because it not only puts down Death and Decay, it benefits from the heart strikes, dealing extra damage to people inside there, but you're also getting damage reduction. It also synergizes really well with the Unholy Decay because Unholy Decays use this a lot for their burst damage when they're fighting a lot of AoE. And so this does damage to the enemies in there, and then also they're getting reduced damage. Frost Dk, I mean, it's still strong, but it's a little wonkier to play with a Frost Dk because a Frost Dk doesn't synergize too well with the Death's Due, but in terms of actual overall power, this is actually doing the best. So here's your clear winner when it comes to Covenants so far in the Shadowlands beta for the Death Knight. Alright guys, so we're not going to go too in depth with the Conduit system because I know most of it's going to probably change, just like the other stuff I was talking about. But generally what you want to know is that the Night Fae Conduit choices all have their own niches. Think of each one of these as your last row in the talent tree. And it's based off of this last ability in the Conduit Soulbind itself. And I'm going to read them off to you one by one, starting with Naya. I hope I said that right, Nia. Grove Invigoration is the final ability you work towards. And the only reason why I'm going to talk about mainly just this ability is because most of the stuff here just changes little tweaks to your class that doesn't make a huge difference. Some of them are just like things like this, where you have a chance to obtain leather, meat, and fish, and the other ones is like your weapon doesn't break or whatever. So Grove Invigoration, healing or damage or dealing damage, has a chance to grant you a stack of redirected anima up to 10 stacks. Death's Due grants you 1% maximum health and 2% increased mastery per stack for 30 seconds. So this is actually pretty good. This is going to be a general pick for things like Mythic Plus because you're going to be in combat quite a bit, and this has quite a bit of good uptime as it stands right now, and it also synergizes well with Death's Due, which again, just to remind you, is this ability, the one that took over Death and Decay, as being the strong ability where enemies that stand in it do less damage. So this one's going to be kind of like your go-to for probably a lot of Mythic Plus and content where you're probably not going to need too much survivability. The next one is Dreamweaver. Again, all these conduits, little path choice doesn't really so far make a huge impact, and we'll probably get more into depth with that when Shadowlands goes live. But this is going to be your cheat death soulbind. Basically, when you take damage that would kill you, you would instead rejuvenate with a wild seed, regaining 30% of HP over 10 seconds. If the wild seed takes more than 14,000 damage during this time, you die. So, and this only occurs once every 30 minutes. So this is actually a good ability in terms of you get like a little bit of a cheat death. So if you want to, instead of taking Purgatory in the talent row, and you want to keep Red Thirst as your final talent, but then you still want to have that cheat death, this is going to be your go-to here. The only problem I have with this is it only gives you 30% HP, which is actually kind of low. But then again, you do have some talents that can kind of help you out when you're under 30% health, namely Will of Necropolis. But the big problem here is that if it takes 14,000, it takes 10 seconds to get out of the pod, and 14,000 damage done to it and you die doesn't seem like very strong. So it's going to be interesting if this gets a little bit of a buff in terms of generating that 30% health over less time, or having the wild seed endure more damage if you don't die. But this is, just think of this as your cheat death. This one here, Wild Hunt Tactics, is actually between Naya and Corian or Corain. It's going to be like your general go-to. This one's your cheat death right here, Dreamweaver. This one, your damage to targets above 70% health, and healing to targets below 35% health. So targets that are above 75% health and healing to targets below 35% health is increased by 10%. Your spells and abilities are enhanced this way. You gain 10% increased movement speed for 5 seconds. So you get movement speed, which is nice, and then you also get 10% buff to your damage or your healing. The reason why this one's good is because Death Strike will do more damage if something's above 75% health, and because Death Strike also heals you, you also benefit from the 10% extra healing that Death Strike does if you drop below 35% health. So this one is probably going to edge out, this Conduit tree is going to edge out over Naya for most when you finally unlock this one. But both are generally good. This one's probably going to be the main go-to for like Mythic Plus content, other PvE content. This is your cheat death, and then this one is just going to be kind of your general one if you prefer this playstyle. Just really quickly going over the actual conduits themselves, not just the conduit tree, the ones that you put in these little slots. You have finesse, endurance, and then you have potency. You have three potency slots for Blood Dk. One of them is for Frosted and Holy as well, which is Withered Ground. Death's Due deals 15% increased damage, which is pretty nice. As you can see, I picked that one in this talent tree. Withering Plague, Heartstrike deals 10% increased damage to enemies. So the potency slots are to increase your damage output. And then the last one here for Blood Dk is Blood Boil, increases damage you take from Blood Dk by 1% for 6 seconds, and it stacks up to 3 times. So these three are going to be your only choices as of right now, but they also scale. So if you think that this is like the only thing, the only 15%, you're probably wondering why it's in white, the 10% is in white, is because there's going to be like a progression scale to getting stronger conduits, so they end up doing more. The number in white changes the more you go out and farm, and the more seasons we go through in Shadowlands. Going down to endurance, the conduits, anti-magic zone's radius is increased by 1,000, and the duration is increased by 1 second. So the duration is the one that is a variable that will change the more it levels up, but the radius of 1,000 is pretty crazy. And could be useful in raid boss fights, or if your team is all kind of spread out in a Mythic Plus and you need your AMZ to reach over there. Hardened Bones, while Lichborn is active, the damage you take is reduced by 5%. This one's a little weird, and maybe stronger the more the number in white increases, because Lichborn just giving you an extra 5% damage reduction is not very, it doesn't look very and sound very good. But as you get stronger and stronger and you get higher levels of the conduit, it actually might edge out and actually be a pretty decent one. You might end up having 2 IBFs or 1 IBF and then this one would be like your mini IDF. Insatiable Appetite. Again, this is a general one. Death Strike's minimum healing is increased by 1%. Pretty nice ability here. This one, Blood Bond, Rune Tap heals you and your party for 5% of your maximum health. Now this one is actually pretty interesting and probably going to be probably mandatory for most of the groups that you go into, whether it's raid or if it's just a party, because this benefits not just you but everybody in your party. So we're probably going to see that this one is going to be a conduit that most people are going to kind of expect you to pick, but it's probably something you're going to want to pick anyway, because why would you not want to help out your team? We're talking Blood Dk here, so your whole point is to help out your team and make sure they don't take damage. So what better way to make Rune Tap a little bit more useful, instead of just for yourself but for everybody. Meat Shield increases the duration of dancing rune weapon by 0 seconds. I'm sure that's a typo. And while active, your parries increase your maximum health by 1%, stacking up to 2 times. And the maximum health is the percentage is going to be the variable there. The one I chose in this conduit slot was Spirit Drain. I think this one's actually going to benefit you more as a tank, because you're usually the one that's interrupting, or at least I do. I do a lot of interrupting. I'm always the first to interrupt, and some of my friends know that. But successfully interrupting an enemy with Mind Freeze grants 5 runic power, and the 5 runic power, the 5 is the variable here. So the more and more this levels up, the more runic power you get. Spirit Drain is probably going to be the best one, because more runic power as a Blood Dk equals more survivability. Fleeting Wind, Death's Advance grants an additional 10% movement speed over the first 3 seconds. Pretty lackluster. It's only the first 2 seconds of Death's Advance. Unless they buff this, or unless like the scaling on the number in white is crazy, I don't see it being super strong or being picked over the other abilities. That's basically the Blood Dk overview of the conduits within the Night Fae. Alright, so the last piece of information we're going to go over in terms of all the systems in Shadowlands is going to be the Legendaries. I'm pretty excited that this has come back. I remember it being a very exciting system in Legion. The difference here is that you can craft them. It's not just a random drop from whatever content. It's something that you're going to work to in the Tower of Torghast. You're going to get materials that you need to build and craft your own Legendaries. And you can craft them on these slots. As you can see, I already created some just to save some time and show you which ones go into which slot. But these are all the Legendaries that we have. I'm even wearing one right now, and that's where we'll start. The boots that I have equipped, Haste Versatility, those are the secondary stats I chose. And the ability is Death Strike refunds 15% of runic power spent if it heals you for more than 10% of your maximum health. Guys, as a Blood Dk, the baseline ability for Death Strike, the minimum heal it does is 10% of your maximum health. So as a Blood Dk, this is kind of a no-brainer to pick, because every Death Strike is going to heal you for 10% of your maximum health, because that's its baseline heal. Getting a refund on your Death Strike in runic power 15% is actually pretty huge. Now, with Ossuary being baseline, Ossuary was the one where your Death Strikes cost 40 runic power, not 45, if you have at least 5 bone shield charges. With Ossuary active and you have 5 bone shield charges, your runic power for a Death Strike is 40. With this legendary on, your Death Strike only costs 36. Or 34, sorry, 34. So it does 6, it refunds 6 of your runic power. Now, the reason why it's specified as 10% of your maximum health is because obviously a Frost DK or an Unholy DK can put this on as well, and it might change the amount of heal. But this one is the one that I'm wearing because it's going to, in the long haul, save you, and all the runic power that you're saving over time gives you more Death Strikes. This one, I feel, is one of the best legendaries that we have, which is the one I equipped. This one here is on the finger piece, and it's on other slots. I'm not 100% sure. I can't remember which ones. Your Vampiric Blood ability also affects all party members 50% of the effect it has on you. So Vampiric Blood is the ability right here where it Embraces death, increases your maximum health by 30%, and increases the absorbs that you receive by 35%, and healing by 35% for 12 seconds. So your teammates are going to get 50% of that ability, so 15% increase in max health, and about 17.5% of increased healing and absorbs. This one's actually pretty good. Eventually you're going to be able to equip more legendaries in Shadowlands. I think the first one you should go after for sure is the runic power refund if you're playing solely Death Knight, and then probably going for the vampiric blood ability right after that, because this one's going to benefit people in your the next one, the third one I would say is the best, is this one here, Super Strain. This is in the neck piece. Your Frost Fever, Blood Plague, and Virulent Plague also apply the other two diseases that reduce effectiveness. So basically I'm a Blood DK, I hit someone with a Death Caress from range, or I hit a Blood Boil on the pack, and the entire pack doesn't just get Blood Plague, they get Virulent Plague and they get Frost Fever at a reduced cost. So this one is actually really good if you are looking for more damage output. If your team doesn't need much survivability, if you're doing Mythic Pluses, then you go with this Death Strike one, and then you may not need the Vampiric Blood one, you may just go with this one to help with damage output. But that's the one, these are the top three for me. The Death Strike refund, the Vampiric Blood for party members, increase of health and healing, and then this one is the extra damage output. And then here's this one, Handguards of the Crimson Rune. When a charge of Bone Shield is consumed, the cooldown of Dancing Rune Weapon is reduced by 3 seconds. Additionally, when Dancing Rune Weapon fades, your rune regeneration rate is increased by 40% for 10 seconds. Now, you guys remember the Rune of Hysteria that I showed you a little earlier in the video? This one actually is just an empowered version of that, also with Dancing Rune Weapon internal cooldown here. I can see this one being somewhat strong because Bone Shield in a Mythic Plus kind of gets sucked up quite a bit. And so you'll see a lot more of Dancing Rune Weapons up, which is actually pretty nice. And you'll also get a lot of rune regeneration for 40% by 10 seconds. But it's only when Dancing Rune Weapon fades. So it's a very nice cooldown, but I'm not 100% sure if it's going to overall compete with the actual fact that you're eventually getting free death strikes from this particular legendary, and you're getting extra damage output from this legendary, and then you're getting the party utility and support out of this legendary. This one might be good for raid bosses, and it might actually see some use in some Mythic Pluses, but I think the other ones actually might be a little bit better. Alright, so what are my overall thoughts on Blood DK in Shadowlands so far in the beta? I feel like there's a lot of improvements in the Blood DK come Shadowlands. I don't think that many things are going to change, at least not for the worse. I think if anything, things are going to change for even the better. I do think Blood DKs are a strong tank right now as it looks in Blood DK. I think if you guys watch other YouTubers, I'm sure you do, they probably put out tier lists, and most of them put them in the middle of the pack, like 3rd or 4th. And I do think that they're a high contender for 3rd with the amount of abilities that they gained. Ossuary becoming baseline, Rune Tap becoming baseline, and then having some synergy with Conduits within the Night Fae at least, or the Conduit potencies. The Covenant choices are a little weird to me. I do think that they really missed the mark on here. I think most DKs are wanting to go Necrolord or Venthyr. At the very least, they want to go Kyrian. No DK is probably going to want to go Night Fae, so unless they like swap the abilities between Venthyr and the Night Fae, it's going to be kind of weird playing as a fairy Death Knight. If you're looking for pure player power, it is going to be interesting if it sticks like that. Things can change, but as it stands, it's interesting, the Covenant choices that Blizzard decided to let Death Knights have. Overall, I do think that Death Knights are in a good spot. I think they brought back a lot of utility. They're taking less damage there's abilities that let us take less damage. And so if you're looking to main a Death Knight, and as a Blood DK specifically, going into Mythic Plus or raids, I don't think you're going to go wrong. If you're a Blood DK right now in Battle for Azeroth and you're struggling staying alive, like I was basically the entire expansion, but I stuck with it because I loved it, you're not going to be disappointed come Shadowlands. You're going to actually be looking at a pretty strong tank, and I think things, again, like I said, are going to look up, and they're not going to get worse from what I've seen and from what Blizzard's been doing. Alright guys, so if you liked the video, don't forget to hit that thumbs up button, hit the subscribe button. It helps me out so much. I want to bring more content to you guys. Comment down below if I missed anything, or if you're in the beta and you're seeing something differently, or if I didn't word something right, or if you have any questions on anything, or if you're confused, or if you have any suggestions on what other content I should put out. Feel free to leave a comment down below. But until then, I will see you guys in that next video. Later.